Greetings from Tokyo, I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to start the Leagues of Votann. Let's go. Thanks for joining me in the studio. Today, we're going to start our journey with the Leagues of Votann. But first, I want to talk to you about winter in Tokyo, or more specifically, how the Japanese deal with it. Now, unlike America, central heating and cooling is actually very uncommon in homes in Japan, and it is more likely that you'll find localized built-in or in-wall air conditioning units, referred to as aircon, because, again, everything in Japan has to be shorter. Now, these units cool the homes in the summer and warm them in the winter, of course, but they do it room by room. So it's not uncommon in Japanese apartments or houses for all the rooms to be compartmentalized. So in between the den and the living room, you'll have a door. In between the foyer or entryway, you'll have a door. That way, instead of heating the entire house, you can just heat small sections of it. I'm not a big fan of this whole sort of process of heating one specific room because it sort of subconsciously makes you want to stay in that one room. You're not utilizing your entire apartment or house, and sort of trap yourself in one area of the home. And frankly, I don't know about you, but it drives me a little bit stir crazy. I get cabin fever pretty quickly. Another thing that's really common for battling the cold winter months is called a kotatsu, and that is a small coffee table with a blanket built into it, and underneath is an electric heater. So the idea there is that you are not sitting on the couch, you are sitting on the tatami or straw mat floor, as is common still to this day in many Japanese apartments and homes, and you are sitting with your legs under the kotatsu watching television or reading a manga, and it's warming your legs. Often the cat is also hiding under there. I have to say that it's pretty fantastic. Well, that's how you and I might deal with the cold while we're here in Japan. But the Leagues of Votann are something altogether different, and the snowy season has inspired me not only to start New Year, New Army, but also the Leagues of Votann. And what better way to represent that than make them icy and snowy? So I've started the Combat Patrol box by going straight for the HQ. Today we're going to build and paint the Khal and place him on a frozen lake base. Let's get started, and I'll show you how I did it. As part of New Year, New Army, and as a celebration for reaching 500 subscribers, I ordered the Votann Combat Patrol for myself. Let's be honest here, there's no world in which I'm not going to paint Space Dwarves. I went straight for the HQ and began clipping the pieces off of the sprue. Now the kit's actually pretty great, and it comes with a lot of different options for your build, including a named character, but honestly, when you're building a dwarf, what kind of a monster doesn't give them an axe? And because this is an HQ, I'm going to give it extra attention, and I've decided to paint it in sub-assemblies. Sometimes the way the models go together, you're going to get these part lines. Now normally you might want to fill that with a filler putty or green stuff, but I've discovered sprue goo. Sprue goo is simply that, bits of sprue chopped up and put into a bottle of Tamiya Thin. Let it sit for several hours and you'll get this slurry of melted plastic. Let it dry for several hours and you can sand it down smooth. This isn't perfect, but it'll be enough to be covered by paint. Once it was ready, I began by priming all of the pieces with Vallejo Gray Primer, working my way around the sub-assemblies. Then I did an underspray of Ushabti Bone to give the shapes volume. Plain white models have this habit of becoming very flat. And once I'd done my underspray, I did an overspray of pure white. I then applied Kislev Flesh as a base to the head, and Beastie Brown where I knew I was going to paint gold. Once all my priming coats were done, I moved on to the gold. Here I'm using Gehenna's gold as a base, working my way around the Khal's sigil. Knowing that I want the bears on the ends to be silver, I'm going to apply a dark gray. Then I apply a layer of lead belcher. Once that's dried, I apply a wash of equal parts Guilliman Glaze and Drakenhof Nightshade. And I shade the gold areas with Reikland Flesh Shade Gloss, working it into all the details and runes. Once the washes are dry, I highlight both the silver and the gold using Runefang Steel, working my way around the sigil, getting the uppermost edges. I then move on to the metallics on the body. Knowing that I want his belt to be gold, I placed down a layer of beastie brown as an undercoat, and on his power pack, where we know we want Leadbelcher, a layer of dark gray. When the undercoats are dry, I then apply my metallics. I'm going to be using contrast basilicanum gray on the fatigues and boots, but I want them to be slightly different values, so I apply a layer of ministratum gray over the boots and gloves, and then begin applying the contrast over top of that once the paint is dry. There's something incredibly satisfying about how this paint goes on, especially when you're using a sable brush. Just watching it flow over the areas and settle into the recesses is extremely gratifying, and it's one of my favorite parts of the hobby. Now, I'm simply being careful to avoid the armor panels here, but other than that, I'm just letting the paint do its thing. And once it's dried, this is the result. Now, of course, we'll go through and clean up with some light gray and make some highlights, but as a time saver, it's incredible. I then applied the gold to all the places that we had based using beastie brown to bring out that rich, lustrous color. And then I set about shading the model's recesses and panel lines using Seraphim Sepia, carefully working my way around the model, shadowing the rivets and armor panels. Panel lining is one of those things that takes an extreme amount of patience, and if you're not in the mood to do it, it's best to just wait. I then moved on to the underside of his cloak, cape, vest thing. I mean, if you look, it's like a cloak, but there's no sleeves. It takes total boss to pull off something like that, and this little guy's got it. And this is where sub-assemblies come into play. I never would have been able to paint the underside of that cape if I had mounted the model on a base already. Now in this case, I'm going to bring out the highlights on the cape. The shadows are doing their own work in this case, but the highlights we're using several layers of a combination of Xandri dust and Ushabti bone, and once each layer dries, making the next pass lighter and lighter. I then move on to the back of the cloak, and here I'm using Mechanicus Standard Gray in 3 thin coats to get a smooth coverage, and then using Mechanicus Standard Gray and a lighter gray, mixing up values just as we did on the underside, hitting those highlights and increasing the brightness on the raised areas, accentuating the folds in the cape. I could have been a lot smoother here, and if I was a madman, I could have masked off the rest of the model and used the airbrush for flawless folds, but I simply wanted to get the model done. Once we had our grays all set, I moved on to the gold trim, and as always, basing with the brown to get that rich, lustrous color, and then using Liberator Gold and washing with Reikland Flesh Shade Gloss. I painted all the leather on the model, including his scabbard and the haft of this power axe, using contrast wildwood. In the right circumstances, contrast paint is like black magic. Look at how it settled into the recesses and left the highlights alone. I cover the head of the axe in Leadbelcher, and then I shade it with Nuln Oil. I've never had the chance to try molten weapons before, so we're going to do that on this model. Now the trick here is to make sure that at the core, where it's closest to the power source, is where it's lightest, and as the blade falls off, it gets cooler. So we're using a series of darker and darker oranges here, and then I'm just going through the edge of the blade and doing some modeling as though it looks like metal that's started to radiate with heat. I'm painting up his Neo-Volkite pistol using a plasma tutorial uploaded just a few weeks ago by Juan Hidalgo. It looks incredible, and it's actually really easy to do. I'll put a link in the description below. And while I have my oranges out, on the left shoulder pauldron, making an orange stripe for the Trans-Hyperion Alliance. This took 4 coats, and once I have those coats down, I go through with a little white and do some chipping and damage to the paint. And then I shade the head with Reikland Flesh Shade. I use Basilicanum Gray contrast along the collar, and then, using a 1-to-1 mix of contrast medium and contrast wildwood, fill in his beard. Again, in the right circumstances, this stuff is incredible, saving many steps. After some quick highlighting with Kislev Flesh, this is what we're left with. With the body of the model complete, we're going to move on to the base. And this one comes with one hell of a tactical rock. It is the Rolls-Royce of tactical rocks. Here, I'm just going to use a series of grays to sort of model the surface so it's not all uniform, using Mechanicus Standard Gray and a light gray. And once those are dry, applying an all-over wash of Drakenhof Nightshade to keep it from looking monochromatic. Once the wash was dry, just sort of working my way around the model, dry brushing with Mechanicus Standard Gray. Once the dry brushing was complete, I went in and painted the small details like the ejected shell casings here, and then I applied a very thin down wash of a medium blue along the base. Now, why would we do this? Well, as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to do a frozen lake base, but because it would look odd if the tactical rock was sitting on top of the ice, we want the bottom part of it to be submerged within the ice. So I went into my 3D modeling program, created a 40mm base, and then recessed the center to create a well for the resin to go into. On a recent trip to the dollar store, I was able to get a UV lamp and a small bottle of clear UV resin. I simply poured the resin into the well of the base, surrounding the tactical rock and filling it up to the edge. Using the UV light, which I assume is made for curing nails, I simply placed the base under, let it sit for 60 seconds, and it came out hard. Now, of course, as my luck would have it, 2 giant bubbles formed directly in the front of the model, but we can hide that. Now I've painted some cracks on the bottom of the base under the resin, and we're going to scratch some additional cracks and make some scuffs in there as well with some sandpaper on the surface to add that dimensionality to the ice. Now here is my favorite part. This is my first time using this. It is Games Workshop's Valhalla Blizzard. It's a technical paint that looks like snow, and it's actually incredible. I love it, and I'm sorry that I haven't used this sooner. And with the snow, our base is complete, and it's time to assemble the model. And you know what else is being assembled? A small growing community over at Patreon. I want to take this opportunity to thank my Patreon supporters, our mallet bearers, Adam Fox and Josh Hannon, our very first Sledgehammer tier member, Cody Newton, and of course, our Thunderhammer bearers, Matt Mitchum and The Rascal. Your support means the world to me, and I'm enjoying the progress that you're sharing over on the Discord. If you'd like to join us on Patreon, we'd love to have you. Remember that joining at any level grants you access to our private Discord server where we're building a supportive community where we help each other become better hobbyists. Well, there you have it, one Khal of the Trans-Hyperion Alliance. This is just the start of the combat patrol, and in future videos, we'll tackle the rest of the models squad by squad. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my pleasure to make and share it with you. Last week as I was editing the video, we reached over 1,000 subs, and I couldn't be more excited. If you'd like to support the channel, please like, comment, and subscribe. Or you can always check out the t-shirt shop, bakingsodatees.com, where we design one-of-a-kind t-shirts shipped directly to you. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.